My so has decided he doesn't have to pay his half of rent anymore, and all of the money he makes is his alone, but the little money I make goes to all of our living expenses. I met my boyfriend when I was 19 and in my sophomore year of college. At the time, I didn't have a job, as I was a full-time student. My life revolved around classes, studying, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my future. It wasn't easy, but I was managing. He was already working full-time at the time, and we started spending more time together. I'd go to his apartment, but I didn't move in. My dorm room still held all of my things, and I spent the majority of my days on campus from early morning until evening. It was a balance I was used to. Even though I wasn't financially contributing much, I helped in any way I could. I'd buy us lunch or coffee when I could spare the change, and since I had a monthly stipend for the university store, I'd spend it on groceries for us. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could do at the time. I graduated last May, but I didn't immediately jump into a full-time job. Instead, I worked part-time starting at 21. In addition to that, I started helping one of my professors with grading exams and doing small jobs for her. It paid well, and it was a great way for me to keep my head above water financially. On top of that, I began studying for the GRE, trying to keep my options open for grad school. When my boyfriend and I first started living together a year ago, things were okay. He still had his job, but it wasn't exactly steady work. He'd bartend for a few months, get bored, and then switch to retail or food service. He's a charismatic guy, so he always found work easily, but it wasn't the type of work that lasted. It was as if he couldn't find something that stuck for him. But while he was bouncing from job to job, things were starting to take a strange turn in our relationship. He stopped paying for rent altogether. We'd always split the rent evenly when we moved in together, but he stopped paying half after a while. For the last 4 months, I've been covering the full rent, which totals about $2,000 a month. This has been incredibly difficult for me, especially since I'm only working part-time and struggling to make ends meet. To try to cope with the rising costs, I took on an additional job helping my professor, but it was still a constant battle to pay bills. The worst part, though, was how little he seemed to care about our financial situation. Not only did he stop contributing to rent, but his financial help with groceries has dwindled down to almost nothing. He buys groceries once or twice a month, but it's never enough to cover our needs. He mostly buys the basics, milk, beer, and steaks. I can barely afford to cover everything else, and I'm always left to figure out how to make do. As for chores and housework, I was handling all of it. All the cleaning, cooking, apartment maintenance, driving, and planning fell squarely on my shoulders. It felt like I was both the girlfriend and the boyfriend. And honestly, I felt like I was his mom sometimes. He'd make a mess of the apartment and I would be the one cleaning it up. It wasn't just the small messes, either. I'd ask him repeatedly to clean up after himself, but he'd ignore me. I once had to wait 7 days before I couldn't stand it anymore and cleaned up a huge syrup spill in the kitchen that he had ignored for an entire week. I'd lay out the cleaning supplies and ask him to take care of it, but it never got done. The same thing happened with garbage. I'd ask him to take it out, it was a simple 2-minute walk to the dumpster, but it would sit there for days. One time, the garbage piled up so high that it leaked and smelled terrible. I ended up having to take it out myself, and he got mad at me for doing it, claiming he was just about to do it. It was infuriating. There were also small things he did that just rubbed me the wrong way, especially with how he treated our apartment. With the fluctuating weather in our area, I had to deal with him constantly messing with the temperature. When it was warm, he'd crank the AC down to 64 degrees Fahrenheit, and when it was cold, he'd turn the heat up to 74 degrees Fahrenheit, making the apartment feel like an oven. It was like he was purposely making things uncomfortable, and I couldn't figure out why. Was it a power play, or was he really that inconsiderate? The last straw, however, came when I tried to plan a simple, frugal date night for Valentine's Day. I had been saving up a little, and we agreed to go to a nearby chain restaurant. I suggested that we stick to a small appetizer or entree under $12, and have 1 or 2 of the beer specials. But when we got there, he ordered the most expensive entree on the menu, several top-shelf Long Island iced teas, and a dessert. I was shocked, but I didn't want to make a scene. When the check came, it was more than I could afford. I asked him to help cover the cost, but he only gave me $20 and told me I had to pay the rest. I had to use the little cash I had left and put the rest on my credit card. I couldn't believe it. Every time I tried to bring up the issue of money, he would point to the fact that in the first 2 years of our relationship, he paid for almost everything. But what he failed to realize was that it wasn't just about dinners and dates. During those years, I wasn't living with him, so I wasn't contributing to rent, utilities, or groceries. He didn't pay for those things. Now that we were living together, it wasn't just about meals, I was carrying the full weight of our living expenses. But he still insisted that things needed to balance out, and that I should pick up the slack since he had paid for so much at the start. To make matters worse, he'd started smoking in the bathroom. I noticed it when I'd take a shower, tar beads on the once white walls, ash in the toilet, sink, and trash can, and the smell of cigarette smoke filling the room. When I confronted him, he denied it, making up excuses like he was just emptying the ashtray from the porch into the trash can, or that the walls had always been light yellow. The proof was right in front of him, but he refused to acknowledge it, even though the evidence was clear. As an asthmatic, it made it hard for me to breathe in that bathroom. I was getting fed up with the excuses and the lies. Finally, we had a huge argument about our future. We were talking about weddings because 2 of my friends had just gotten married. I mentioned how much their wedding had cost and how they managed to pay for it themselves. He then made a comment about how the bride's parents traditionally pay for everything. I was taken aback and said, that may be traditional, but it's not common anymore. My parents can't afford a wedding. Bob and Jane paid for most of their wedding, and their parents chipped in. He immediately got defensive and said that his mom wasn't going to pay for our wedding and that it should be on me and my parents. It felt like he had no concept of financial reality and that I was the one expected to bear the brunt of everything, including our future. I feel exhausted and emotionally drained. He's been living for free, eating for free, using water and electricity for free, and not contributing in any meaningful way to our living situation. Meanwhile, I'm working multiple jobs, managing all the housework, and trying to keep our finances afloat. It's not just about the money anymore, it's about the lack of respect and consideration for my time and efforts. We rarely fought in the beginning, but now it feels like every conversation turns into an argument about finances, responsibilities, or the future. I don't know what to do anymore, and I'm seriously questioning whether this relationship is still healthy or if I'm just being taken advantage of. Update 1. Thank you to everyone who responded or sent me a PM. I read everything. It took me a while to process it all, but I needed to hear it. I needed that outside perspective, because I've been drowning in this situation for so long that I stopped being able to tell what was normal and what wasn't. I felt emotionally drained, physically exhausted, and honestly, scared. There were things I'd been pushing to the back of my mind for months, maybe even longer, and now, after reading all the comments and messages, I couldn't ignore them anymore. I was in a shitty situation, and I needed to do something about it. I realized that confronting him outright wasn't an option. Simply telling him we're done wouldn't work. He had a way of twisting things around, of manipulating situations to suit himself. He would use guilt, anger, and frustration as weapons, and I didn't want to be caught in the crossfire. I knew how it would play out. He'd tell me I was being unfair, that I was throwing away everything we had, that I was being unreasonable and selfish. He'd bring up the past, the first 2 years of our relationship, and act like those years justified everything he was doing now. And if that didn't work, if I didn't cave, he'd try to make me feel like I was making a huge mistake, like I was giving up on him when he needed me the most. I wasn't going to let that happen. I was going to plan an escape, and I needed to do it carefully. The first step was securing a place to go. My parents, who I hadn't wanted to involve, were the best option. They knew things had been rough between me and my boyfriend, but they didn't know the full extent of it. I left out the worst of it when I talked to them, keeping things surface level, saying that I was financially struggling, that things weren't working out as well as I'd hoped. They agreed to let me move back in for a while. It wasn't ideal. The thought of moving back home after living on my own for so long felt like a step backward, but at the same time, it was the only way I was going to be able to save money and get myself back on track. Next, I had to come up with a reason for leaving that wouldn't immediately set off alarm bells for him. I told him I was planning to go to grad school, which was true, and that I had decided to enroll in a summer class or 2 before officially getting accepted. The university I planned to attend allowed this, and it made for a perfect excuse. I told him that because of this, I'd be moving back in with my parents for a little while. I tried to keep it as casual as possible, not wanting to stir anything up, not wanting to give him a reason to argue with me. But as soon as I said it, I could see the change in his face. He wasn't happy about this, and I could see the gears start to turn in his head. Update 2. Things have been moving fast since Tuesday, and I still feel like I'm catching my breath. It's strange, this mix of exhaustion and relief, like I've been running a marathon with no finish line in sight, and suddenly, the race is over. My body still feels the weight of it, my mind still lingers on the fear and stress, but there's a quiet sort of emptiness now, a space where all the anxiety used to live. Talking to my mom was the tipping point. I had held back a lot from my parents, never giving them the full picture of how bad things had gotten, because part of me was embarrassed, part of me didn't want to admit it to myself, and part of me thought I could still fix it. But after everything, after reading all the responses, after sitting in my apartment and realizing I felt more like a prisoner than a person in my own home, I knew I had to say something. When I told her more of the details, how he had stopped contributing financially, how he trashed the apartment and refused to clean, how he yelled and punched things and made me feel like I was walking on eggshells, her reaction was immediate. She wanted me out of there as soon as possible. No discussion, no hesitation. I barely had time to process my own thoughts before she was asking when she could come get me, how soon I could pack, what I needed to do to cut ties. It was like a switch flipped, and suddenly I wasn't making this decision alone anymore. The apartment situation was a mess, but at least there was a way out. Since the lease was in my name, I had control, but not as much as I would have liked. The landlord was sympathetic, but his hands were tied. Without any official criminal activity, they couldn't legally force him out immediately. He had 30 days. Breaking the lease entirely would have cost more than just paying out the last 2 months, so I took the lesser evil and paid through May. The one silver lining was that I could put the apartment on the market, meaning once his 30 days were up, they could start showing it. As soon as someone else took over the lease, I'd be off the hook for the remaining rent. It was frustrating, knowing he still had a month there, but I was done. I copied all the necessary documents, left an official note for him about his 30-day countdown, and walked away. Since his name wasn't on anything, he had no legal claim, no leverage to argue his way into staying. Work was another thing I needed to tie up. My first job was willing to transfer me to a location near my parents' house, though it wasn't guaranteed. I had to show up to my current location a few more times until it went through, but my manager understood the situation and scheduled me lightly. I wouldn't be alone at any point, there would always be at least 3 other people in the store with me, which was a small comfort. My second job, the one with my old professor, had to end. That one was harder to walk away from, not just because I needed the extra money, but because I actually liked the work. But it was under the table, cash only, easy to step away from. She understood. She wished me well. That was when it really started to hit me. The more steps I took to untangle myself from this relationship, the more I realized just how deep I was in it, how much I had normalized. People kept pointing out that this was an abusive relationship, and at first, I didn't want to hear it. I kept thinking, no, it wasn't that bad, I wasn't being hit, he wasn't screaming in my face, he wasn't outright telling me I was worthless. But the more I read, the more I researched, the more I let myself actually acknowledge all the things I had been pushing down, the more I realized it wasn't about how bad it could have been, it was about how bad it already was. The financial manipulation, the emotional exhaustion, the way he controlled the space we lived in without ever lifting a finger, it all added up. I had been trying to convince myself that it wasn't abuse because I didn't want to believe I had let it happen. But I had. And that realization hurt in a way I wasn't ready for. As much as I wanted to be strong, I felt myself spiraling. The more I thought about it, the more I blamed myself. I kept thinking, why did I let it go on this long, why didn't I leave sooner, why did I keep making excuses? I felt damaged, like I had lost something I couldn't get back, like I had let someone chip away at me for years and now I was looking at the pieces left behind, unsure how to put them back together. But I couldn't dwell on it. I had too much to do. My mom didn't want me staying in that apartment for even one more night. She wanted me out immediately. I had to convince her not to come charging in that second to drag me away. I knew I had a window of time where he wouldn't be there, he was working late that night, and I knew his shift wouldn't end until after 5 p.m. So my mom, my dad, and my uncle arrived at 5:30. I told my best friend what was happening, and she came too. Between the five of us, we managed to pack everything I owned into our cars. I didn't linger. I didn't second guess. I just packed and left. And then, suddenly, I was home. There were still loose ends to deal with. I had a few more GRE classes left, but it was just once a week. The transfer at work wasn't finalized yet, but I'd figure it out. My landlord had everything he needed from me, and anything else could be handled over email. I'd probably owe something for damages when the lease officially ended, but that was a problem for later. The first night away was strange. I kept expecting my phone to ring, for him to ask where I was, for him to show up. When he finally did call, it was late, and I ignored it. He called again. Then he texted. When I finally answered, he was confused and angry. He wanted to know where I was. I refused to tell him, which only made him more furious. I laid it all out for him. I told him he had been financially and emotionally abusive, that he had made me feel small, that he had taken advantage of me over and over again, that I was done. I told him I didn't love him anymore. And then something shifted. The anger disappeared, and suddenly he was crying. Apologizing, begging me to come back. He said he could change, that he was only acting this way because he was depressed, that he needed help and I should give him another chance. He even claimed that he was just about to tell me we were financially even now, as if that was the only problem. The conversation was surreal. I felt nothing. Not sympathy, not sadness, not anger. Just cold detachment. I was done. He kept talking, cycling between anger and sadness, trying to find the right angle to break me down, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was already gone. Eventually, he noticed that I wasn't engaging, and he snapped, demanding to know when I was going to stop this bullshit. I cut him off. I told him I didn't want to talk to him anymore, that he owed me thousands of dollars, that he was horrible, that I never wanted to see him again. And then I hung up, right as he was about to start crying again. He called and texted repeatedly after that. I ignored it. Today, he's still calling. He won't stop. I'm getting a new number. I don't know what the next few months are going to look like. I know they're going to be hard. But at least I won't be with that asshole anymore. Update 3. Wow. I never expected my post to blow up like this. The outpouring of support has been overwhelming, and I can't thank everyone enough for the kind words, the advice, and even the messages from people who have gone through similar situations. It's both comforting and heartbreaking to know how many people understand exactly what this feels like. And to whoever sent me gold, thank you. I wish I could say I'm doing great, that everything is back to normal and I'm thriving, but the truth is, it's been an emotional roller coaster. One moment I feel relieved and free, the next I feel like crying for no reason. I've laughed at how ridiculous some parts of this situation are, I've felt moments of intense anger and confusion, and sometimes I still get hit with this deep, sinking fear. But if there's one thing I do know, it's that I made the right choice. One of the biggest things that has come out of this is realizing I need help processing everything. I know I want to go into counseling, and I'm planning to start as soon as I can. There are too many emotions swirling around, too many things I ignored for too long, and I don't want to carry this baggage around forever. I've spent so much time blaming myself, wondering how I let things get this bad, but I keep reminding myself that I'm out now. I'm safe. That's what matters. One of the small victories in all of this is that I managed to block him on my phone, which means I don't think I'll have to change my number after all. At first, I was nervous about blocking him, thinking he'd escalate somehow, that he'd try to contact me in other ways, but the silence has been one of the most peaceful things I've felt in a long time. No more calls, no more texts, no more of his exhausting back and forth moods swinging between anger and fake remorse. Just silence. That being said, I did make the mistake of listening to a few of the voicemails he left before I blocked him. And wow. If I needed any more confirmation that leaving was the right choice, those messages provided it. The first one had him using my pet name, talking in that cutesy baby voice he used to use when he wanted something, the way he would when he thought he could sweet-talk me into forgiving him. It was sickening, hearing it now, knowing how insincere it was. The next message was just him screaming. There was no in-between, no gradual shift in tone, just a complete 180 from saccharine manipulation to unhinged rage. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so terrifying. I laughed at how absurd it was, but at the same time, it made my skin crawl. He was unpredictable, and that unpredictability is what scares me the most. Because of that, I've decided to take extra precautions over the next few months. I took everyone's advice seriously, and I will be extremely careful. I now have pepper spray with me at all times. I won't be traveling alone, especially at night. If I have to be on campus, I'll be using the campus or police escort services whenever possible. There's a small, paranoid part of me that keeps thinking he might show up somewhere, that he might try to confront me, but I refuse to live in fear of him. I'm being cautious, but I'm not going to let him control my life any longer. One last small but satisfying victory. I called my apartment complex this morning to ask if they could grab the router and cables from my place and hold on to them until they could be retrieved. They were more than happy to help, which means he no longer has internet. The last few days have been a whirlwind, and I know I still have a long way to go before I fully process everything that's happened. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my own life again. The road ahead might be rough, but at least I'm walking it without him dragging me down.